There comes a moment in every love story that you don't write down, a moment that doesn't go in the photos or the highlight reel. It's the moment when someone confesses a truth so raw, so unexpectedly honest, that it shatters every version of the past you thought was real. This was one of those moments. I didn't lose you. I pushed you away because I didn't know how to handle love. They didn't say it proudly. They didn't even look you in the eyes, but the words echoed louder than anything they ever shouted. Because finally, the silence that lived between your heartbreak and their absence had been filled, and it wasn't you. It was never you. You gave them love, the kind of love that doesn't beg to be seen but shines anyway. You showed up, you gave patience, you gave presence, you forgave things they never even apologized for. You kept hoping that one day they'd see what was in front of them, but they didn't know how to receive it. Not because you gave too much, but because they never learned what it means to be held and not hurt. Because love, real love, terrifies the ones who never believed they deserved it, so they self-sabotaged. They created distance, they picked fights, they made you question your own worth. They let you walk away and told themselves a story that made it easier to sleep at night. You were too emotional, you were too demanding, you changed. But now, years, or maybe just silence, later, they tell you what really happened, and it hits different. It hits not because you want them back, but because you needed to hear that your heartbreak wasn't caused by your flaws. It was caused by their fear, and it matters. It matters because you spent nights wondering why your love wasn't enough, why someone who said they cared could act like they didn't, why it always felt like you were loving alone. But now you understand. They didn't lose you in a tragic twist of fate. They let you go. They made choices that pushed you further and further away. And the reason wasn't that you were unworthy. It was that your love demanded a level of honesty they weren't ready to give. Because real love doesn't just give, it reflects. It shows someone their shadows, and some people would rather destroy something beautiful than face themselves in that mirror. So what do you do with a confession like this? You grieve all over again, but differently, not from pain, from clarity, because now you see it wasn't you trying too hard. It was them not trying at all. You were not a mistake. You were the right person at the wrong time for someone who was too afraid to grow. And here's the real truth. You were not loved badly because you were hard to love. You were loved badly because someone couldn't meet the depth of your heart. Their confession isn't your closure, it's confirmation. It confirms that your love was never misplaced, it was just misused. So don't waste this clarity by rewriting the ending. Don't make this about going back. Don't mistake their regret for readiness. Just because they now see what they lost doesn't mean they know how to keep it. Because someone who pushes love away isn't changed by the absence of it. They are changed by the willingness to face their fear, and unless they've done that inner work, they're still the same person who let you go in the first place. And you're no longer the person who begs to be chosen. You're no longer the one who settles for almost. You've lived through the fire. You've cried yourself clean. You now know what you offer, and you won't shrink for anyone who doesn't recognize it. So let their confession be a chapter, not the epilogue. Let it remind you that you were real, you were present, you were loving, and your heart didn't break because it was weak, it broke because it was open. And that is beautiful, because the next time love shows up, you won't be afraid of being too much. You'll be looking for someone who isn't too little. You will never be the same again, but that's not a loss. That's your becoming. Some truths don't whisper. They hit you like a storm, not because they're loud, but because they finally say what you always knew but weren't ready to believe. I stayed with you, but loved someone else the whole time. When those words are spoken, it doesn't just hurt. It undoes you, not because you weren't enough, not because you didn't give your best, but because someone shared your life and never really gave you their heart, and suddenly it all makes sense. The distant stares, the way they pulled away when you got too close, the way you had to work for their attention, for their touch, for their honesty, like love was some puzzle you had to solve just to feel secure, and now you realize. You were never really alone in that relationship. There was always a shadow, a memory, a ghost between you and them. It was someone else's name in their silence, someone else's face in their distance. And you were trying to love someone who had already left. You just didn't know it yet, and that realization doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your confidence because now you question everything. Was any of it real? Did they ever love you, or were you just their distraction? Were you the safe choice while they healed from the one they truly wanted? And the pain isn't just about what they said. It's about what you gave while they were giving themselves elsewhere, emotionally or mentally. You poured your love into a container already full of someone else's memory. But let's pause here. Let's not turn this into shame because you didn't know. You were present. You were honest. You showed up for the connection they said they wanted. You can't blame yourself for believing someone who kept their truth hidden behind smiles and "I love you too"s. And if you stayed longer than you should have, it's only because you hoped. You hoped that the wall would fall, that they would see you clearly, that your love would be enough to create new memories stronger than their old ones. But the truth is, you cannot compete with someone's past if they haven't made peace with it. You cannot hold someone who still wants to be held by someone else. And you cannot heal someone's heart if they keep it locked in another person's hands. So what do you do now? You grieve. Not just the relationship, but the version of you who tried so hard. You honor the part of you that kept showing up even when love wasn't fully returned. You stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and start saying, "I deserved someone who chose me fully," because you did, and one day you'll meet someone who doesn't have divided loyalty. Someone who doesn't carry the past like a secret weapon. Someone who doesn't flinch when you love them deeply because they're not using you as a placeholder for someone they couldn't keep. You will be with someone who doesn't just stay, but stays present, and when that day comes, you'll remember this moment, not with bitterness but with gratitude, because the confession that shattered you also set you free, free from being second in someone's story. Free from proving your worth to someone still chasing a fantasy, free to finally choose yourself. This pain, it's not weakness, it's evidence of how deeply you loved and how much more you're capable of when it's with someone who loves you back without looking over their shoulder. So let this be the last time you tolerate half love, the last time you let someone keep their heart locked away while asking you to stay. You are no one's second choice, you are not a backup plan. You are not the distraction someone needs to forget who they truly miss. You are the destination, the healing, the future. Let them go. Let their truth settle where it belongs. In the past, because you are walking forward now, and you will never be the same again. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from betrayal or cheating or screaming matches in the middle of the night. It comes from the quiet confession, "You were never the problem. I just wasn't ready for the love you gave." And suddenly, everything makes sense. The confusion, the inconsistency, the way they pulled away every time you got too close, too kind, too real. It wasn't you. It was the love you carried. It was the way you saw them so clearly, before they were ready to see themselves. Because real love, it reveals. It doesn't just hold your hand. It holds up a mirror, and some people would rather break the mirror than face their reflection. You showed up with open arms. You didn't ask them to be perfect. You just asked them to try, to be present, to be honest, to meet you halfway, but they couldn't. Not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't yet believe they were worthy of the love you brought to the table. And instead of rising to meet it, they rejected it. They pushed it away. They made you question whether you were asking for too much. But now here they are, maybe weeks, months, or years later, and they finally say what you needed to hear when you were still fighting to make it work. "It wasn't you, it was me, I wasn't ready." And that hurts, doesn't it? Because it would have changed everything if they had said it then, if they had admitted they were scared instead of pretending you were the problem, if they had paused instead of pushing you away. If they had leaned in instead of running out, you would have handled the truth better than the confusion. You would have forgiven the fear if only they hadn't made you feel like you were too much, because that's the part that still lingers, isn't it? You carried the weight of a love that couldn't land. You watered a plant that never grew, not because the soil was bad, but because it was still frozen. And when you love someone deeply, you try to give them more understanding, more time, more softness. You lower your voice, you raise your patience, you shrink yourself in the hope that they'll grow, but they didn't, not because you failed, but because they weren't ready to meet someone like you, and now they're finally admitting it. And maybe that gives you peace, but it also gives you a new kind of pain, the kind that says, so it really wasn't me, all along. So now what? You take this truth, and instead of using it as a reason to go back, you use it as a reason to move forward, stronger. Because when someone confesses they weren't ready, what they're also saying is that you were ahead of them, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. You were ready for the kind of love that isn't found in games or mixed signals or emotional avoidance. You were ready for real, and that is not something to mourn. That is something to protect, because next time you won't let someone project their unreadiness onto your worth. You'll recognize the signs. The hesitation, the distance, the inconsistency, and instead of trying to earn love from someone who can't hold it, you'll walk away with your dignity intact. You'll say, if you're not ready, that's okay, but I am, and I'm not going to pause my heart while you figure yours out. Because the love you gave was not too much, it was just misdelivered. It was an ocean poured into someone still afraid of the tide, and next time it will reach a shore that's ready to receive it. So thank them. Not with words, but with your growth, with your boundaries, with your healing, with your refusal to ever again apologize for loving fully. Because you weren't the problem. You were the blessing they weren't ready for. You were the lesson they'll carry long after you've let go. And now you walk with the kind of clarity that only pain can purchase. You'll never be the same again, and that is your power. There's a silence that enters the room after a truth like this. I used your love to fix my brokenness, and then blamed you when it didn't work. It doesn't come with tears or fireworks. It comes with stillness, the kind that wraps around your ribs and presses right into the ache you thought had healed. Because for so long you carried the weight of their confusion, their mood swings, their push dynamic, wondering what you did wrong, wondering why your love wasn't enough to make them stay, to make them show up, to make them better. But the truth, they weren't loving you to love you. They were trying to use your love to fill a hole they never told you existed. You thought you were building a relationship. They were building a crutch. And the moment it didn't heal them, the moment your love didn't erase their insecurity, their fear, their shame, they turned it on you. They made you the problem. Suddenly you were too emotional, too giving, too intense, too much, too soft, too expectant, when really you were just present, you were consistent, you were whole, and that wholeness, to someone broken and unwilling to heal themselves, became a mirror too bright to stand in front of. Because the broken pieces of a person don't get stitched together by someone else's affection. They get stitched by accountability, by self-reflection, by doing the inner work, and they weren't doing any of that. Instead, they latched onto your empathy, your loyalty, your need to fix things that aren't yours to fix. And when the fantasy they built around your love didn't deliver them from their pain, they decided you were the reason they still felt empty. They didn't say it like that, of course. They said it in sighs, in silence, in walking away without explanation. They said it by making you feel like you had failed at something you never should have been responsible for in the first place. Because here's what no one tells you: you cannot save someone who won't sit with their wounds. You can't love someone's lack of self-worth. You can't give enough to someone who hasn't learned how to receive. And when someone refuses to face their pain, they project it. And sometimes the one who shows up with the purest love becomes the one who receives the ugliest version of their hurt. But now you know. Now you see it wasn't your job to fix them. It wasn't your role to be their healer, their therapist, their savior. You were supposed to be their partner, but they turned you into a lifeline, and the moment you couldn't carry both your heart and their healing, they made it about your shortcomings. Not their neglect, not their avoidance, not their unwillingness to look in the mirror. They blamed you for what was never yours to carry. So what do you do with this kind of confession? You don't internalize it. You don't go back to wondering, was I not enough? You don't replay the relationship looking for places you could have loved harder, because you did love fully, fiercely, faithfully, and they didn't fall short because your love was flawed. They fell short because they were hoping love would do the work they never committed to. That's not your fault. That's not your burden. Let that sink in. Let it clear the air inside your chest. Let it soften the blame you've been carrying against yourself. Because the truth is, you were never the cure, you were the gift, the blessing, the moment of calm in someone's storm, and just because they didn't know how to hold that, doesn't mean it wasn't real. Next time you'll love with boundaries, next time you'll ask, is this person ready for what I bring? Next time you won't offer therapy in place of partnership. Next time you'll protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. Their brokenness wasn't your responsibility, their healing wasn't your job, their blame wasn't your truth. Let them carry their own story now, let them sit with what they did. Let them reckon with the fact that they tried to turn your love into a cure and blamed you when it didn't work. Because you are done carrying the weight of someone else's healing journey, and you will never be the same again. Would you like me to continue with the next keynote? I pretended to be cold because I was scared of how deeply I felt for you. Sometimes the deepest love is buried under the coldest silence. And when someone looks at you and finally says, I pretended to be cold because I was scared of how deeply I felt for you, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like realization, a confirmation of what your heart suspected all along, that the distance wasn't rejection, it was fear, that the walls they built weren't because you weren't worthy, but because they didn't know how to hold what they were feeling. You felt it, didn't you, in the way their eyes lingered a little longer when they thought you weren't looking, in the hesitation right before they pulled away, in the words they never said but showed you in all the ways they couldn't control. They were in love, maybe even overwhelmed by it, but instead of leaning in, they stepped back. Instead of saying you matter, they said, I'm busy. Instead of holding your hand tighter, they shoved it away. Instead of warming up to you, they turned cold, chilly, aloof, distant, and you thought you were doing too much. You thought maybe you were too available, too intense, too emotional. You asked yourself, am I imagining this connection? Did I misread everything? No, you didn't. They were feeling everything. They just didn't know what to do with it. Because when someone has never been safe to feel, when they've never had love that stays, when they've been hurt by being open, they start to believe that love equals loss. So when you came along, open, soft, stable, it was too much. Not in a you're too much way, but in a this feels too real, too intimate, too possible kind of way. And possibility terrifies people who have only known disappointment. To them, love is a risk. It's the moment before the drop, the silence before abandonment. So they do what they've always done. They retreat. They act like they don't care. They pretend your presence doesn't move them because acknowledging it means acknowledging how much they have to lose. So they armor up, and you're left standing in front of someone who says, I don't feel anything. While their eyes scream everything, but here's the truth. You didn't deserve their fear. You didn't deserve to be punished for their past. You didn't deserve the cold shoulder just because your warmth revealed something real. Their confession, it matters, but it doesn't erase what you went through. It doesn't erase the confusion you carried when they chose distance over vulnerability. It doesn't undo the countless nights you wondered why love felt like rejection. Because when someone loves you but is too afraid to show it, you are still left empty. You still go home wondering what's wrong with you. when the real issue is what's unhealed in them. And yes, it's tragic, because maybe if they had just said it sooner, if they had just let themselves feel, you could have built something beautiful. But you can't be the only one feeling. Love isn't real if it's not expressed. It's not enough to love someone silently. It's not enough to hide behind fear and expect the other person to read between the lines forever. You needed safety, they gave you distance, you needed reassurance. They gave you avoidance, you needed to be held, they gave you ice. So now that the truth is out, what do? You see them, you understand their fear, but you also choose yourself, because the person you end up with must be brave enough to love you out loud. To risk to stay, to say, I feel deeply for you, and I'm not going to hide from that. You're not here to teach someone how to express what they already know they feel. You're not here to pull emotions out of someone who's too scared to meet their own. You are not the safe space for someone who doesn't know how to be vulnerable, and that's okay, because love is not just a feeling, it's a choice, and the right person won't run from their feelings, they'll run to you with them. So let this truth free you, not just from the confusion, but from the burden of proving your worth. You were never the one who made love scary. You were just the first one to make it real, and they couldn't handle it. But you deserve someone who can, so when they say, I pretended to be cold because I was scared of how deeply I felt for you, you say, I know, but next time I choose someone brave enough to stay warm, and then you walk forward wiser, softer, stronger, and never the same again.